Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Samantha Dunn. I'm the Senior Editor of Premium Content and Engagement for the Southern California News Group. It's my pleasure to tell you about the Southern California Policy Forum, which is bringing you this discussion today on clean energy efforts and challenges. The SoCal Policy Forum is a partnership of the Southern California News Group and the Center for Social Innovation at UC Riverside, in collaboration with a range of policy and research centers across Southern California. It is a platform that regularly convenes policy experts that can better engage and inform the public about key issues affecting our lives in Southern California. Just to let you know, today's audience is muted to allow for the free flow of conversation among the panelists. But if you have questions, and we hope you do, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. Now it's my pleasure to bring on Karthik Ramakrishnan, UC Riverside professor and director of the Center for Social Innovation and AAPI Data, as well as co-founder of the SoCal Policy Forum. Hello, Karthik.
Hi, Sam. So great to join you here today and for this amazing conversation I believe we're about to have. Our focus today is on clean energy. Just to say a little bit more about SoCal Policy Forum, this is something that was started about 1.5 years ago as an experiment between our center and the Southern California News Group. Part of what we saw was the need to have smarter and deeper conversations in California that bring together stakeholders from a variety of sectors, including academia, government, industry, and community, and to dig deeper into issues that we often don't get to do, but that are so vital for the future of Southern California. Southern California News Group is a perfect partner for this, given its reach across the Southland. And we're just thrilled to be continuing the partnership with the focus this time on clean energy. So clean energy, it's something that is very timely, as we will hear from many of our speakers today. It is timely both with respect to where the technology is, as well as to where the political economy is. And that's both on the politics and the economics of what is viable these days. For Southern California in particular, we are known for many things, including a region that is in love with the car and other modes of transportation. Unfortunately, over the decades, it has also meant that it has harmed our populations with respect to dirty air, and that remains true. When we've seen the state of the air reports over the years, Southern California, the LA basin performs among the worst in the country. And we've seen other indicators of particular communities in Southern California that are very adversely affected by dirty air. Just as other societies harness their talent and focus all of their innovative energy to try to solve them, Southern California today is in that situation. So for example, just like Japan, when confronting an aging population, devoted a lot of its innovation energy into robotics, we've seen world-class innovations in robotics and advanced technology coming out of Japan. Similarly, in California, and Southern California in particular, we are seeing the cusp of developments that hold a lot of promise and potential to create a greener future, not only for our region, but hopefully for the rest of the world. I should note that in addition to the conversation we have today with the guests that I'm going to introduce, our Sunday opinion section will feature commentary by speakers as well as others on clean energy. And in a future session, we're going to take a deeper dive into clean transportation as a particular application of energy. The focus of the event today will be on energy, including the generation of energy, the transmission of energy, and the storage of energy. So without any further ado, I'd like to welcome our speakers. If you could unmute yourself and turn on your cameras. First, we have Danny Kennedy, who's the Chief Energy Officer at New Energy Nexus, joining us. Then we have Maite Sanchez, Director of Energy at LA Cleantech Incubator. Next, we have Devin Ross, who's Senior Manager at Southern California Edison. And then we have Michelle Sims, who's Director of Sustainability at SoCal Gas. It's a very high-powered panel, as you can already see just by their titles and affiliations. And we look forward to getting to know more about them and their organizations as we get into the work here. So we're going to be doing this. I'm going to be doing a series of round robin questions. Then after that, my colleague Larry Wilson from the Southern California News Group has some questions that were already sent in by readers, as well as some of his own questions that he's going to ask. And then I'm going to look at what's in the Q&A. So please, if you do have questions, don't just type it in the chat. We're not going to be monitoring the chat for questions. So if you have a question, please type it in the Q&A and we will go through them. So first, I'm going to toss it over to Danny Kennedy. And really, this is for each of our speakers. Please use this opportunity to say more about your organization and some of the ways that it engages on the topic of clean energy. Danny, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks so much to the University of California, Riverside and Southern California News Group for hosting this. New Energy Nexus is the organization I run. We grew out of the California Clean Energy Fund, and basically we're the investor in clean energy startups that you may never have heard of, but have been doing this for 15 years in California, have had a strong track record working with the California Energy Commission to help commercialize a lot of fantastic new companies from sort of very early R&D stage through their prototyping and beyond to commercialization. We currently run the Cal Seed Fund that's about $35 million to invest in new companies. Over the last 4 years, we've done about 100 startups ranging from widgets that are being tested at UC campuses today for better wind turbine blades to lithium battery chemistries that are going to be in your airplane before you know it when you're going on your electric flight between El Centro and LAX. So we do this all around the world with New Energy Nexus. We run incubators and funds in about 10 cities around the globe, but in California, our biggest team and practice is there and the longest standing. So we're deeply embedded in the clean energy transition, which is sweeping the world in a manner in 2021 that I think a lot of people don't realize. Just huge volumes of money are now invested in this, largely because this year, the G7, the International Energy Agency, and the United Nations have all basically said, no more investing in coal, oil, or gas. So, a decision that California kind of took around the turn of the century to get off fossil fuels and to do it in a managed transition, the rest of the world is now facing, and all the investment committees and all the fiduciaries and all the big funds and Wall Street and wherever you care to name are now looking for opportunities in this space. And California is the tip of the spear because we have a law that says we'll be renewably powered by 2045. And we've been working on the transition for 20 years. So that's where we live and what we do, and looking forward to the conversation.
So one thing I see in my notes here, Danny, I think maybe you can mention briefly what's going on with lithium in the South Salton Sea. And I know that's probably something we'll get to later.
Yeah, I hope we do, because I think one of the great opportunities for Southern California in particular is to drive the convergence of mobility and electricity solutions, which is anchored in the battery technology. California's actually pioneered a lot of the IP around advanced batteries in the world, although most of that IP gets scaled and made in Asia now, Korea, Japan, and China. We've suddenly had a Sputnik moment in the United States where we've gone, whoops, we invented all these things, the rechargeable lithium-ion batteries, 1971, year of my birth in LA. Well, it was invented in Texas, really, but that was commercialized by Sony for the Walkman in Japan, and then scaled by Panasonic to sell to Tesla to put in cars we created here in California. But we don't actually make the most valuable component, which is the battery. And one of the reasons, there are many why, but it has been raw material sourcing. But the great news is that California is sitting on the largest resource of lithium, maybe in the world, certainly in this hemisphere, and that is around the Salton Sea. It's actually in the aquifer under the Salton Sea in Imperial County. And that water that comes up to produce geothermal power is also rich in lithium. And so there's a push on which Secretary Granholm, the new energy secretary in the Biden administration, is really getting behind to work out how do we recover this lithium as a byproduct of geothermal power that we're already generating down in Southern California and which would be the basis for an advanced battery manufacturing supply chain all across the country potentially, but particularly in Southern California, where there's this perfect storm of elements. The car culture you mentioned in the setup, Karthik, the demand center of LA for automobiles, but also an incredible manufacturing capacity across the inland counties, which already make buses at Lancaster and electric scooters and electric planes, and Rivian, the new startup that's going to sell 100,000 delivery vans to Amazon, comes out of Irvine. You know, we should be building this whole soup to nuts value chain in Southern California, starting with the lithium out of Lithium Valley and Imperial County.
Great, thank you, Danny. Well, you've mentioned some of those assets in LA, so I'm going to turn it over to Maite from the LA Cleantech Incubator. Maite, can you say more about yourself and Lacey and how it plays in the clean energy space?
Yeah, definitely. So I also want to thank you all for inviting us to be a part of this forum. So as you mentioned, I'm the energy director within our market transformation team at the LA Cleantech Incubator. And what we do at the LA Cleantech Incubator is focus on what we see as our mission, which is to build an inclusive green economy. And the way we do that is through 3 different ways. So first is like the traditional way of what you would think about when you think about an incubator, which is our startups. So we provide programs to early stage to mid-stage startups, all those who are up to accessing commercialization for their products. And then we also, and through those programs, we connect them to customers, provide them with access to pilot opportunities, as well as just provide mentorship there. And then through our other 2 strategies, one of them is market transformation. So that's a team that I'm a part of. And that's where we work with the public and private industry, or sectors, I should say, to push forward initiatives, whether it's, you know, at the local, state, federal level, regional level, to push forward on initiatives that are going to help accelerate clean tech adoption. And then lastly, we have our enhancing communities team. And what they do is ensure that as we're doing all of this work, we're thinking about how we're incorporating underrepresented individuals, communities into all of it. So that translates through a number of different measures like workforce development training, as well as ensuring that the startup founders that we are recruiting are diverse and are coming from underrepresented communities. So that's more or less the breadth of Lacey, but I'm happy to dig into other details through the conversation.
Excellent, thank you, Maite. Next, we have Devin from Southern California Edison. And Devin, if you could say, I mean, it may be just obvious how SoCal Edison is involved in clean energy, but especially with respect to your 2045 pathway, if you could say more about that. I'm not sure many people know about what that is, so it'd be great to hear more about that.
Certainly. Thank you, Karthik. And thank you, UCR and SoCal News Group, for having us. Happy to be here. So yeah, at Southern California Edison, hopefully people know we're the electric service provider for vast majority of Southern California. You do have municipals, you have San Diego Gas and Electric to the south of us and PG&E to the north, but sort of within that central to southern end of the state, we're generally going to be your electric service provider. And so with those GHG goals and policies kind of mentioned by others so far, you know, we saw that as an opportunity to think about what does it take to get there? And that's really what we've called Pathways 2045. It is our vision, it is our North Star to say, if we're going to achieve these lofty aspirational sort of goals, mandates for the state, what is it going to take? And that exercise we did was looking economy-wide, what will it take? What will it cost? How do we most efficiently, most effectively achieve those goals? And so you can think of it as a blueprint. Certainly, we think of it internally as our blueprint for how California can combat climate change and really achieve those GHG goals. And so it really depends, it hinges on a significant amount of change. It's everything from getting our electric supply fully decarbonized. By 2045, we'll have 100% of retail sales be decarbonized, so from clean energy sources. That leads to a tremendous amount of investment on customer technologies, grid technologies, generation technologies. We've sort of early estimations are about close to 200 billion, 170 billion to be more precise, of investment needed to achieve this goal. It will take a lot, as I just mentioned, on the customer side. We're going to need customers switching out their vehicles towards electric vehicles. We might see customers switch out sort of gas appliances towards electric appliances. We'll see use of carbon capture and sequestration. We'll see use of natural lands. We'll see all sort of evolution across all these areas of our economy that point towards clean energy. And so that sounds like a big challenge, and it's far away. And so it is something that, there's a degree of uncertainty as we look out towards that. And it's going to take a lot of thought, a lot of innovation, a lot of partnership, a lot of economic development, a lot of growth for us to achieve that goal. And so that's kind of the thinking in putting out something like Pathway 2045, is as we get those aspirational goals, demonstrating what a path might look like is a good step. It's a good start towards what we have to do. And so there is, likely other paths we could take. We might not be making, exact right choices now, but we're also in a place where that urgency is there. We're seeing climate change effects already. I think if wildfire is a very obvious one. The heat wave we had last week is probably another one. People are probably not used to 100+ degrees in early June. And so, we're seeing it. We're having catastrophic wildfires like no other time in the state's history. And so we need to make sure we're addressing that. And at the same time, COVID-19 has been another thing that came out of nowhere, a big surprise to everyone. And it's had a huge impact. It's changed how people work. It's sort of exposed some of the inequities across the state and different communities. And so it's sort of re-emphasized to us that we need to make sure that as we progress on this clean energy future, we don't leave anyone behind. It's really important that all of us take a part in it and that all of us make sure that those around us are part of this transformation. So to that end of sort of knowing we have to take action and start this progress, we've done things at SCE where we have a little bit more confidence it's the right choice to make. We've already taken major steps. So we have our electric power supply. It's happy to say in 2019, we're already at over 50% of our energy delivered was from clean energy sources. So we are getting there. We're not quite to 100%. The leap from 50 to 100 is significant. There's a lot of challenges that come along with that, but we are already at that 51% mark. Or on the other side of it, electric vehicles, certainly light duty electric vehicles, the market sort of has turned where a lot of people want it. A lot of people are interested in it. And we have two of the largest EV infrastructure programs in the country are administered by Southern California Edison, and they're sort of geared towards ensuring light duty vehicles have charging opportunities as well as medium and heavy duty vehicles have opportunities. So I think as you'll hear throughout the panel today, there's a lot of challenges with achieving the goals we're talking about, but that just means there's a lot of opportunity, right? So there's a ton of room for innovation, a ton of room for economic development. And again, just want to reiterate, we have to do that and keep in mind that over this next 20+ years, everyone's part of this. Everyone should be part of that transformation. We don't want to leave anyone behind. So keep an eye out for those disadvantaged communities and actors that might not always play a role.
Great, thank you, Devin. Well, one quick thing I'll ask you. Is there anything special about the year 2045? Was it just like, for people who are not like deep into like energy and environment?
Gotcha. Yeah, so basically there's a few landmark bills and executive orders in California that put a marker as 2045 as both 100% of retail electric sales have to be fully decarbonized. So sort of that piece is a component. But in addition to that, there's carbon neutrality goals that the state has set to say that across all the economy, we want to reduce GHG to a net neutral or net zero sort of piece. And so along the way, there's goals, there's 2030 goals, there's sort of milestone goals, but ultimately 2045 is sort of that benchmark to say we want to be at zero carbon as a state.
Great, thank you, Devin. And so that the part of the reason why I ask is I see that SoCal Gas has Aspire 2045. So we have Michelle Sim from SoCal Gas. So Michelle, and you're the Director of Sustainability. So can you say more about what that means and what your kind of plans for 2045 are?
Thanks, Karthik. It's really exciting to be a part of this discussion. Appreciate it. Much like Edison is the electric provider for our region, SoCal Gas is the gas provider for Southern California. We are also the largest gas utility in the nation with our 100,000 plus miles of pipeline infrastructure. And as the Director of Sustainability at SoCal Gas, my team is responsible for the development of our comprehensive sustainability strategy. And that also supports, and that is to support and maintain the energy reliability to our 22 million customers from Fresno through the Inland Empire down to the Mexican border. Now, our strategy is heavily influenced by the fact that, one, human influence on climate is clear, and recent greenhouse gas emissions are the highest in history. We have a responsibility to solve for these negative impacts, and we recognize that if we don't start addressing the problem adequately long before mid-century, we will have a widespread and long-lasting effect on the natural ecosystems with very severe consequences. And I think this goes to Karthik, what you asked about 2045, why is it so important, and why are people looking at mid-century towards these goals? And as we examine the industry and our role, it was important to us to engage with customers and partners, as well as some of our strongest critics. And what we found was that an equitable clean energy future is very possible, but only with an open and honest discussion, much like this one, around an integrated energy ecosystem where the electric and gas grids are seen as complementary energy ecosystems. Now, earlier this year, we published Aspire 2045, our sustainability strategy and climate commitment to net zero. Now, Aspire 2045 is not a white paper or a clean fuel strategy. What it is, it examines the intersectionality of our environmental stewardships, our social imperatives, and the reporting our reporting to really transparently show our progress. How we produce, deliver, and store energy will have a direct impact on the economic vitality of our region, impacting our communities, particularly our disadvantaged communities. I think we heard that with everyone who has spoken before me. And really our strategy stands on 4 pillars and really what's most important to us as a company, and that's safety, operating a resilient system, championing people and our communities, and really enabling the energy transition. And on this pillar of energy transition is where we set our net zero goal to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions in both our own operations and the delivery of energy to our customers by 2045. Now, this makes SoCal Gas the largest gas distribution utility in North America to set a net zero target that really includes all 3 scopes of greenhouse gas emissions. And much to how Devin described, it supports California's 2045 carbon neutrality goals, and it really demonstrates the gas system's essential role in advancing a carbon neutral economy. Now, 2 particular ways that we are looking to decarbonize California and meet our state's energy demands as well in a safe and reliable and effective way. We're focusing on a suite of clean energy technology and fuel solutions, taking into consideration regional and industry constraints. We're making deliberate investments in new and proven technologies, including clean hydrogen, renewable natural gas, fuel cells, clean hydrogen, electric vehicle infrastructure, and carbon capture and storage technologies. The second thing we're really focusing on and continuing to focus on really is to strengthen our partnerships, both locally, nationally, and internationally, and really taking the learnings from others that are ahead of us, and then getting others that may not be as, to the point where we're at to help bring them along, because together we really need to go on this journey in really unlocking our collective ability to reach carbon neutrality by mid-century. So I appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this distinguished panel, and I'm really looking forward to an authentic and open discussion of how each parts of the energy ecosystem can support an equitable energy future.
Excellent. Thank you, Michelle. So before we, folks have been talking about energy generation, transmission, storage, we'll get to that in a bit, but especially for those who are non-specialists, there are some terms that were thrown in here. And I'm just going to ask some folks, and this is going to be kind of rapid round. I guess I was going to say maybe there's no right or wrong answer. There probably are different right answers. We don't want wrong answers here. So first, in terms of, how does your organization define progress on climate action? We've heard terms like climate neutral, net zero, decarbonization. So Devin, maybe we'll start with you and just toss it to others to take a crack at it. So decarbonization, what does that mean?
Sure, yeah. So I think for us, again, policies establish these definitions. And so climate reductions, climate neutral, it's really a math equation at the end of the day, right? That you can measure the emissions that are left over. So there are ways to directly reduce emissions. There are ways that ultimately you offset or capture and sort of sequester emissions. And so this equation basically works out to whatever is you can reduce and eliminate, you eliminate, and then what's left, you have to have a way to balance it. And as long as that sort of resultant unmitigatable emissions are equal to what you're able to offset or capture, that's essentially neutrality. And net zero is just another way to say neutral, I think, and decarb is really, I think the easiest way to put it is to remove GHG from the atmosphere. And so that's kind of how we think about it. And I'll probably stop there and let others chime in on that.
So let me just ask as a follow-up, and others, please feel free to chime in. I'm already learning so much just from what was shared today. So is there a difference between, in any of these terms, between allowing the carbon to come out of the earth, as it were, but then capturing and putting it back, versus preventing it from leaving the earth in the first place? Is there any terms that like differentiate between those two kinds of things, between, say, net zero or neutral versus decarbonization? I'm just trying to get my head around this terminology here.
You're asking a great question, Karthik, and I think that this lexicon and vocabulary will be debated a lot over coming years because the urgency is going to get more extreme. I mean, for me, what we worry about is the graph behind me, which every strip represents an average temperature on planet Earth. And as you can see, it's getting hot around here, and it's just going to get more so. And right now, this change in the climate has caused us to be so concerned that we set laws in the distant future, 25 years away, when it was said it was actually 28 years away, to reduce the thing that's causing the temperature to go up. I think as we learn, we've got to just be firefighting constantly in order to keep the temperature lid in an acceptable level. We're going to go from netting out to true zero calculation. So you're right, the net zero conversation is around sort of, oh, well, if we let this much carbon escape in the atmosphere, we'll do something else which will sink so much carbon or reduce so much carbon. But when you really think about it intellectually, that's not how we solved smoking, for example. We didn't say, oh, you can have a packet of cigarettes a day so long as you pay for someone else not to have a packet of cigarettes a day, and you net out the secondhand smoke that's killing your children. We decided to tax cigarettes and to put limits on their availability and to ban them in certain circumstances. And I think where we're going to go with carbon pollution is that, like, a true decarbonization strategy is one which doesn't have point sources of pollution and doesn't try to fix it at the end of the pipe or through some sort of accounting mechanism, which is what the netting conversation of net zero is truly about. And certainly, that's the intent of the law. I think the other thing that's going to happen in California is you're going to bring forward these timelines. As mentioned, the 2018 passage of Kevin De Leon's bill for 100% renewables in California was much fought, and there was much consternation and gnashing of teeth, just as there was when a renewable portfolio standard was set for 50% or 33% or 25% before it. But each time the state has exceeded its goals by time and by measure and created jobs and value and wealth in the state as a result of that. And I think we're going to bring these things forward as a result of that, which is what was evidenced in Gavin Newsom's declaration of a 2035 timeline for electrification of vehicles, the clean transport schedules. The whole world is realizing we can't wait to 2045 or 2050. We're going to be doing this in the 2030s at the latest if we're going to keep the place habitable, given the red emerging in the background.
So let me go over to Michelle just on this. And Michelle, you briefly mentioned kind of different ways when we think about gas, like including hydrogen fuel, for example. Are there kind of and maybe we're kind of already going to the generation conversation, but are there like cleaner and dirtier ways of thinking about gas? And then Devin, I'm sure we'll come back to you because you'd already hinted about this, even in terms of sources of electricity. We can't just assume that all electricity is clean, but just in terms of gas, can you help us understand the difference in the different ways that gas is produced that might have implications for climate?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Karthik. I think it's a really important question. I think first I'll start out with the fact that for most people who don't grapple with the question of climate change solutions every day, a goal out to 2045 or mid-century seems really far away. And I think to Danny's point, not only does it seem far away, but it almost allows one to mistakenly believe that we have a whole lot of time, right? And we disagree. Because as I mentioned earlier, the IPCC has, put out studies noting that human influence on climate is clear and it's growing. So it's not only the energy that we are sourcing that is part of the problem. It really is the human waste products that come out of our everyday living, the luxuries that we have become accustomed to, right? So we need to address the problem long before mid-century, and to Danny's point, long before 2030. The reports say you need to cut emissions by 50% of today's emissions by 2030. That's a whole lot of emissions. And right now, I think a lot of folks are talking about technologies out into the future, potential other, solutions coming online. But I think there's a sense of urgency that we can't wait. And when we think about those two components of technologies out into the future, we can't wait, there's a sense of urgency. And we as human beings are contributing to these emission problems. On your point of fuels and gases, we have really examined renewable natural gas and hydrogen pretty in depth. The beautiful thing about renewable natural gas is that it solves a big methane emissions problem. It is a almost drop-in fuel that requires very little or no infrastructure changes or modifications for us to use today. When we looked at the California strategy to meet the GHG reduction goals that include short-lived climate pollutants as a source of emissions reduction, that's about 35%. Of that 35%, 62% of the short-lived climate pollutants are methane. And people assume methane is—
And these are coming from landfills, like where are they coming from?
Over 70% of that comes from waste streams that can be repurposed and used as fuel. So when you ask where's it coming from, it's coming from landfills, organic waste, agriculture. And I think the fact is that methane is 28 times more powerful of a greenhouse gas than CO2. The fact is that, over 70% of that comes from naturally occurring waste streams that we as humans produce. And cutting that methane emission is one of the strongest levers we have today to slow climate change over the next 25 years. And if we can take that waste, right, prevent those emissions going into atmosphere and harness that and really make fuel and energy out of it that we can use, which we call renewable natural gas today, why wouldn't we do that? The opportunity to take waste and produce fuel and energy is available to us. And I think, an additional benefit is that as we look at RNG, it's not only from waste streams, but also from dead trees in forests. And I think in California, as we are facing increasing wildfire threats, there's a huge opportunity to capture those emissions from the forest material and use it again to create renewable fuel that can be used to fuel some of the largest emission profiles in the state, like the transportation sector and the industrial sector.
Great. So we'll come back to you in a bit, Michelle. Thank you for that. One of the things that you bring up, I think that's implicit in all of this, is that you can set these goals, you can put regulations, but really you need to have innovation that helps us get there. So I'm going to go over to Maite in terms of innovation. Can you talk about what Lacey is doing to try to bolster innovation? And especially, when it comes to startups, but also established firms, and also thinking about social impact. So let's just start with you, and then we can go to others on this innovation question.
Yeah, definitely. So that's quite a broad question. So I'll try my best to kind of give you more insights. But I realized in my introduction, I didn't provide you with an overview of like what we actually focus on. So within Lacey, we do have 3 areas that we prioritize. So one is clean energy, and that's mainly electric. The other is zero emissions mobility, which is also focused on an electric transition. And then lastly, what we refer to as sustainable cities. So kind of going back to the discussion around how are we better utilizing our resources and making sure that we're thinking about upcycling, not only recycling, in the broad economy. But
Lily,
how
I
are we
gotta pause you there. What is upcycling versus recycling?
Yeah, so when you look, I'll just kind of speak to the beginning of a product. So when we're developing new products, normally you go out and let's say you buy your dress, etc. You no longer want that dress. You either do two things. Maybe you throw it away in the garbage. Hopefully you don't do that. But another thing you can do is donate it to Goodwill, donate it to family, etc. So that's allowing the life cycle of that product to continue rather than it going back to the waste and going into a landfill. So part of and actually within the clean energy transition, we discuss around how are we utilizing our storage systems. So for instance, can we use EV storage, the EV batteries that are going to be in our cars to transition those to an energy storage system that's powering your home. So utilizing our resources in a much smarter manner. I think growing up culturally, we haven't done the greatest job at really figuring out, one, how to use less, but then two, how to utilize the resources that we currently have in a better, efficient manner. So what's great, and you kind of see that shift going on, at least in Southern California, you see the cultural shift around it. I know, for instance, like younger generations with friends of, kids of friends, you already start seeing that culture kind of change in terms of just like their fashion choices or how much they're buying, et cetera. So that's one of the areas where we encourage innovation. For instance, one of our startups that we currently have has built a line where you as a parent who has a newborn can actually rent baby clothes rather than just buying them. Because as we know, babies grow really quickly in the first year. So why, go forward and buy new clothes as each month that's changing. So that's one of the ways that she's hoping to encourage less waste around baby clothes. But going back to our work and what we're doing in the clean energy space. So one, we've been talking about this broad discussion around climate change and the urgency to do something sooner than later, which I wholeheartedly agree with. But I think the other thing that's important to bring up is how last year, in addition to the wildfires that we were experiencing, as well as the heat wave, we also saw for the first time since the early 2000s, this risk of reliability to the grid. And that was for a number of reasons. One, it was climate change exacerbating the conditions in terms of, having a heat wave going on. Everyone's utilizing their ACs, there's high demand, and not only in the state of California, but also in the neighboring states. So just really a strain on the broad grid. But then the other thing was not planning quickly enough on this renewable transition. So we did have, we've had a lot of success of having natural gas, a transition off of the grid and have the opportunity to replace that with renewables. But in that shift, there wasn't as much intentional planning around making sure that we have enough generation during the times when we don't have solar production. So during the evening times, and then also now more and more during like the early morning times. And all of this really caused Lacey to reflect on going forward in the next key couple of years. What do we need to do now to not only ensure that we're reaching, our RPS goal, which renewable portfolio standard goal of getting to 100% of zero carbon by 2045, but also shifting it to say, how can we ensure that we're also thinking about reliability and resilience? And this past summer, we saw the aftermath of that, a lot of businesses or areas that were heavily affected buying, their Tesla wall, other energy storage systems, pairing it with their solar rooftop. For us, we're concerned that in this transition, those who are with better means are going to be able to do that, as we have seen that shift happen already. But then what's going to happen to the other individuals who don't have the resources to respond to these unfortunate circumstances? So something that we're really focused on is our local grid and how do we modernize it so that it's a system that really is responsive to the needs of our communities now, rather than also just thinking about like the energy transition and increasing our renewable storage resources on the system. And
oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, just to wrap that up, what that means to us is making sure that we have clean local resources. So really thinking about how we are planning the grid in a much more localized manner, and making sure that we're also developing technologies that are supporting and responding to the larger grid, so that those technologies are able to promote the health of the grid, in addition to giving that security to individuals.
So just a very, very rapid answer, if you could, to this. You're an incubator. Does this mean that all of the firms that you're incubating are in one, like they're in this one giant building, or do you is your incubation services helping people wherever they are in Southern California?
Yeah, great question. So so the startups that actually do end up coming to Lacey, we do have a preference for those that are doing direct business in LA or have plans to develop their business in the city, because we, along with just supporting innovation through the startups, we're also focused on creating jobs. And that's another section I know we're going to talk about. But one of the things that we do is through our workforce training programs, we end up pairing up some of the fellows with the startups. So you're having that direct connection there, and in the process, developing local clean energy jobs.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to go quickly to Danny, because you're an accelerator and not an incubator. Or can you just say about what you do on the innovation side?
We don't maintain a physical space like Lacey does. Wonderful campus down in the Arts District, which we collaborate a lot with, and a lot of the companies we fund and accelerate through our training with the Cleantech Open through Lacey, or in Lacey physically sometimes. And as you just heard, like this focus on resilience and innovation is actually this really exciting kind of Cambrian moment in the startup scene in California. Just to give you a couple of real life examples, I hope it's okay to name names, but we had a company last month get a big investment called Gridware, which is like a box that Southern California Edison or some of these companies would be putting on the distribution pole in your neighborhood to make the grid smarter and more able to deal with high temperature and resiliency questions in terms of intermittency on the grid, because fire would cause lines to come down and things like that. We've had companies like Connect come up through our processes. They actually came out of a hackathon, which is a fun kind of thing we do at places like Lacey, where you have an ideation sprint with a bunch of smart people in a room for a weekend with pizzas and Red Bull, and you create new apps for this and that. In this case, a bunch of finance traders came up with a gamification of electricity contracts, basically. And now that's resulted 8 years later in a company that's distributing 1 million smart thermostats to homes all across Southern California to help people flex their power, or to actually magically flex your power. If you don't understand what I'm talking about, you can check out Kristen Bell on Facebook promoting Connect's product. And basically it helps all of California reduce electricity load at the height of demand, which is, during these hot spikes and this weather we're having, and manage for that and save money as a result. Actually, you get paid money or a credit on your bill with them. So there's all this crazy cool stuff, software and hardware combined and integrating to create this modern grid that can help us drive down the demand for dirty electricity and allow the variable renewables to be managed.
So final quick thing, Danny, the Cal test bed, I think you had mentioned that. What is it, and is it, where does that fit in this universe of innovation here?
It's a really wonderful program we manage with the University of California Office of the President. Again, Lacey is one of our partners without the Los Angeles Cleantech Incubator, but the UC at the highest level and the California Energy Commission have committed to support these startups that are prototyping, which means, I've got a better mousetrap and you claim your mousetrap catches mice better than anyone else's, but someone has to measure and evaluate the mousetrap, like a third party effectively. And we go to the UC. There are many test beds on campuses, on the 12 campuses of California, plus the labs that University of California manage. and place these startups with students and faculty and do measurement and evaluation processes to verify whether or not the product does what they claim it will do, whether it's a better lighting solution in a building or whatever. And then those products can be more easily commercialized, and they get feedback and iteration through the academic exercise. And that program is one of the ways we're accelerating innovation and commercialization of technology in California. It's this wonderful example of the largest public university in the US collaborating tightly with clean energy entrepreneurs to get products to market in the time required.
Great.
caltestbed.com is the website if you want to check it out.
caltestbed.com, is it?
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. Well, so I want to transition to talk about clean energy in terms of generation, storage, and transmission, and then kind of weave in this part about jobs, as I know Maite just started talking about. So first, in terms of innovation when it comes to any one of these things, so take your pick. We're going to have to pick up the pace a little bit. So just pick your kind of favorite thing you want to talk about when it comes to innovation. So we'll start with Devin. What do you find exciting in the innovation space when it comes to either generation, storage, or transmission?
Yeah, so I think, well, personally, just quick aside, Karthik, innovation is what brought me. I'm a Midwest transplant. I've stayed out here for 15 years because of California's innovative approach and sort of the work done at SC. It's sort of been something that I love. It was part of why I agreed to this panel. It's a topic very near and dear to me. And so when we think about it, it's really hard to separate those three, right? I think Michelle covered it a bit, as well as Maite. Like, the electric system is the connection between all these devices, right? And so maybe I'm talking transmission, but really as generation evolves into new resources, the transmission system is presented with new challenges. Storage can be one of those solutions. Customer devices can be one of those solutions. And so we at SC, we actually took yet kind of another visioning exercise around developing a plan called Reimagining the Grid. And so that is our sort of technical companion to pathway that says, in order to achieve a GHG goal, here are interventions. We now have laid out, when we look at our electric system and the range of issues we have to solve, it's not just GHG, it's reliability, it's safety, it's resilience, it's all these, it's affordability, it's equity. The grid will have to evolve, and the grid will have to necessarily evolve in how we plan it, how we operate it. And so I think the sheer volume of challenges and the space for innovation is probably the most exciting part of it. I think there's going to be a tremendous need to partner and collaborate and jointly develop solutions to standardize across the industry, across the country, across internationally. There's going to be huge emphasis towards that. And then I think the one other part that I just want to highlight that I always forget to, as an engineer and sort of technical background, is one of the things the utility is unique in is we administer programs. We have that touch point with customers. And so it's not just technological innovation, it's innovation about how do you get these technologies into people's hands? How do you adopt it? And I think that's where, with various programs we have, and as we see technologies, we know technologies are ready, we actually do innovative things, whether it's financing, direct incentives, marketing, education. All these things are sort of the other side of innovation, that it's one thing to create and produce a product, but we need those used. And so I think it's always important to make sure that we're thinking about how we get it into people's hands. And again, back to some of my earlier points, it's not just about those with the means to adopt it. It's probably even more important to get it to those folks that don't have the means, and make sure we're innovative in how we get the more disadvantaged communities adopting.
Great, thank you, Devin. Michelle, over to you. In each of these, not each, in any one of these things, what do you find most interesting or exciting when it comes to innovations that are maybe already here or soon to come when it comes to clean energy?
Yeah, I think, I echo Devin's, all the points that Devin raised. I think Maite aptly noted earlier, as larger portions of our energy come from renewable or sustainable sources, the electric grids will need to find ways to be flexible, right? Otherwise, there'll be widespread outages that can have serious economic, social, and health impacts. And so the electric grid's flexibility, I think, can only be possible with long duration storage. And those are going to be from sources like hydrogen, leveraging the gas infrastructure for dispatchable, ready as needed power. That is what is going to give us reliability and resiliency. And from a sustainability standpoint, we have to take into account material sourcing, land use, ecological impacts as we think about, if we want to do it with all batteries, what does that mean from that standpoint? Is there a mixture of things that we can implement to minimize the impacts that it may have on those areas of ecology, land use, and material sourcing? So I think there can be a thoughtful way of how we increase the integration of the electric and gas grid in the most effective way to deliver low and zero carbon fuels, to make sure that we have reliable, resilient, affordable energy. And really, I consider our 100,000 miles of pipeline to be a source of energy storage that can be leveraged by the electric system to really deliver the energy in an equitable way, and probably one of the most cost-effective ways. I think there's a recognition that today we float natural gas predominantly in our system, and that is fossil natural gas. But this is part of our vision and our goals, as part of our net zero goals, to transition not only ourselves, but our customers towards low and zero carbon fuels so that the infrastructure can serve as a hub for clean energy.
Great. Well, maybe just one quick follow-up to you, and then we'll go to Maite, is on jobs, right? So what are the kinds of jobs when it comes to these kind of transitions that are either already being created, or how should we be thinking about jobs as we think about these transitions?
I think with the clean energy future, there's a whole lot of opportunity. The way we think about our net zero goals is around what we call the 3Ds, and that's decarbonization, diversification, and digitalization. So we do see a whole lot of jobs, not only with the digital aspect of actual technology, but a whole lot of information and data that are coming online that are not only being looked at, but processed in a way where we can use that information for both, analytics around how do we do business better, more effectively, more efficiently, but also to provide predictive analytics, right? How do we mitigate some of the things that we are seeing that impacts our environment? I think those are the types of jobs that will be coming more and more online. And I think in terms of, other jobs today, I know people have asked, well, what about jobs with the gas industry, and are people going to have this just transition? And really looking at the gas infrastructure and what we do today, how we produce, transport, and serve our customer is going to look different in the future than it does today. There's an acknowledgement there. But I think the types of jobs we have today won't go away. They may focus on different things. Like if we flow more hydrogen in our system, it's having the skill sets that know how to manage that. How do we manage the valves and pipes to accommodate those types of fuels? So I think there will be a transition in the types of information and skill sets and knowledge, but that's growth. That's continuous growth, right? But I do think there is going to be an abundance of technology innovation space, as well as really the data analytics and data science that's going to really help to propel us to progress towards the future.
Great. So just maybe about 60 seconds each to Maite and Danny, the jobs question. So Maite, what's Lacey doing with respect to clean energy jobs in LA?
Yeah, so something that we're doing is what's known as the Advanced Prototyping Center Fellowship. So as Danny actually referenced earlier, Lacey does have a prototype lab on its campus that, as we're starting to reopen, it's hopefully going to start getting a little bit busier. But through that, we have a fellowship where we target people of color who are underemployed or unemployed. And what we do is kind of like we see this as an opportunity to get them plugged into the clean energy economy. So we have a fellowship that they also, they have a career coach, they have the opportunity to get certified in a certificate that's recognized by the industry in the clean energy space. And then they have the opportunity after they conduct their training to go into an internship with one of our partners, whether it's Edison, who is actually a sponsor of the program, or are startups. And then through that, they have the opportunity to actually put into practice what they learned. And our hope is that through this, they're getting plugged into this broader ecosystem that is the clean energy transition, and can find a next career through this 5-week accelerator in the beginning and then the internship. So that's one way that we directly support clean energy job creation.
Great, thank you, Martha. Danny, how about you?
Jobs, jobs, jobs is what we do, really. You know, when I say that, I mean all these startups we've supported, like these 100 companies that have been backed by the Cal Seed Fund, or the 47 that have gone through Cal Testbed. They're growing small enterprises in California. Guess what? That's what creates jobs in California. You know, it's not big companies that are employing people coming out of COVID. It's small companies coming back and growing. And that's one of the things that clean energy is very good at. We, you know, employ more people in the solar industry in California than the utilities. So SoCal Gas, Southern California Edison, PG&E, SDG&E, all the CCAs, all of the others don't add up to more employees than just the mom and pop solar shops that put solar on your roof. That's why we need to do this, because it is economic opportunity. The diversity of inputs in the modern grid, with all these generating assets and storage assets and newfangled technologies making it all work, mean more jobs in the system, even while it's lower cost. So while labor is a bigger unit of a cost per unit, that the technology and the generation input is less, and so the overall system cost is less. Like on average, between 3 and 7 times as many people get employed per kilowatt hour of clean electricity as dirty. So we win on jobs hands down. And as California goes into the 2020s, coming out of the Great Recession and then the pandemic, we're going to want more of this across the state.
You know, one thing I'm wondering, maybe this exists already. I mean, Devin, you were talking about you're like over 50% now, 51% on these different metrics, and including on jobs. Is there a dashboard anywhere that you can just see a snapshot for California, and maybe by regions, and all of these goals, but also things like jobs, for example? Because that seems like that would be kind of a good and easy way. And if not, let's try to make it happen. Because it would be nice just to see visually kind of a snapshot of where we are and where we're trying to go on these different things. Okay, so the final round, and this is truly kind of rapid fire here, so 60 seconds. What is your call to action? And it could be to government, investors, or industry, but what would your call to action be to try to accelerate a clean energy future for Southern California? If we want Southern California to be known as the epicenter for this work globally, what would your call to action be? So I'll start with you, Danny, because we started with you when we did it. So what would be your call to action?
We didn't really get to talk much about it except when you asked me to in the intro, but to build out Lithium Valley in a truly wonderful way, involving the communities of Imperial County at the table rather than sort of on the menu, as often happens with mineral recovery operations. You know, this is not mining, this is a byproduct of geothermal power. We can take lithium salts out of the water and use it to build batteries. There could be cathode manufacturing facilities, battery factories, gigafactories as they're called. You know, we've got one in America. China are building 100. How about we build a dozen of those across the inland counties of Southern California, and then the vehicles that will put them to work across the country, and then the grid storage solutions that we need interstitially in this renewably powered electricity network that we're building. All that is possible if we use as a cornerstone of this cornucopia of opportunity the competitive advantage we have in California with Lithium Valley, the biggest resource of lithium in the country, with almost zero carbon potential to produce the batteries that America needs to get off carbon fuel systems.
I love the imagery in your words, Danny, from Cambrian explosion to a cornucopia. Love it. Okay, next I'll go over to Mindset. What would your call to action be, Mindset?
I would heavily second Danny's. I'll add another one, but I would heavily second it. I think in addition to that, you know, in the greater LA region, we have been very aggressive about, you know, electrifying our transportation. So it's just creating that hub and really having the opportunity to put Southern California on the front of it. In addition to that, I think I would just say, let's all be aggressive and really, I think, open to take on risk. So much, like going back to Michelle's point, we don't have a lot of time. We need to start reimagining the way we've done everything. And, you were discussing, what's something that supports innovation. Partnerships is key. If Lacey is going forward and developing and supporting these clean tech innovations with our entrepreneurs, and there's no one saying yes to a partnership and validating that technology, it's not going anywhere. So I would just say like a willingness to be perhaps take more risk than you would have in the past.
Great, thank you, Maite. Over to you, Devin.
Yeah, so I think just building off the last two and maybe in a tagline sort of manner, I'd say embrace, engage, and be flexible. And so on the first one, embrace this challenge, embrace this opportunity. It's a great thing that we're all embarking on, and as long as we're all sort of agreeing on what we want to achieve, I think California has ample room and ample opportunity to be that global model of how to do this right. So that's certainly part of it, is getting embrace. Engaging in it. I mean, that's something I've been touching on. This can't be top down. It can't be policy driven. This is going to take everyone. We're going to need to break from the status quo. We're going to need new voices, new ideas. That's going to be really important to sort of both surface sort of creativity, but ensure that we're bringing everyone along on this journey. Again, that's really important that we all need to engage in this. And then lastly, I think it's been touched on a bunch, but flexibility is huge here. I mean, we're trying to solve something where we have a very, goals are set for a long time, but there's urgency now. There's also, got to be recognition that things will advance, things will change. I think, look at the last 15 months. Who thought I'd be sitting in front of my fridge talking to you all? That has now been converted to a water fridge, so no worries there. But, it's something that we're going to have to deal with, changes and challenges. Things will emerge, and so let's be flexible. Let's think about what are the right times to make big investments, what are the right times to make small sort of piloting, testing sort of actions, and that's just going to be part of it. So again, I'd say embrace in it, engage in it, and be flexible.
Great, thank you, Devin. I was wondering if the fridge meant something when you first came on. I was like, is that some kind of fridge of the future that's going to do something really cool? But it's just your fridge, so okay. And then finally, Michelle, over to you. What would your call to action be?
I think people often forget that California is so diverse. And if we look at the landscape of California, and often we think of, for us as SoCal Gas, we think about our service territory, and that's like only half of California. And when I think of that, even in that, it's so diverse. We have our rural agricultural area in Central California. We have our, dense inner cities, like Los Angeles. We have our top industrial hubs in the nation with the 2 largest ports in the nation. And with this comes a whole lot of economic impacts. And I go back to saying, how we innovate, how we produce, deliver energy is going to be so critical on our economy as well as our communities. And we forget that these various nodes within the state of California are going to require different sources of solution. And I think this is where, clean solutions really need to be a very broad perspective of having a portfolio of solutions that can serve the different nodes in different ways in a very flexible manner. And someone aptly reminded me the other day, information doesn't always equate to understanding. So it's my hope that future discussions like this, that not only is there a sense of awareness and urgency, like everyone echoed here, around reaching our climate goals to net zero, but that it also means leveraging public-private partnerships, like Maite stated, to help shape the most equitable and cost-effective pathway, because that's really key. And we believe that it will require an integrated energy system that will leverage clean electricity from the electric grid and clean molecules and gases from the gas grid.
Great. So I think if I had to summarize from all of these things, there is an urgency. We need to have flexibility. We need to be context specific, context aware, but we really need to double, maybe triple down to make sure that we create the jobs and the kind of entrepreneurship and innovation opportunities that can propel us forward. So hopefully that kind of, there's some maybe broad agreement on some of those things, and maybe the devil's in the details in terms of how we do it. I'm pleased to invite my colleague, Larry Wilson from the Southern California News Group. And Larry is a deputy opinion editor from SCNG, and he has some questions that have already been submitted, as well as some of his own. So Larry, take it away and some of the questions you have for our panelists. And
Great,
probably
you.
Need to stop the screen share there.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Larry.
Thank you very much, Karthik. And wait, I just want to get this clear. Devin works for the electricity company, and he's sitting in front of a refrigerator that's powered by water?
No, it's an electric fridge. But
okay.
It's full of water at this point, as opposed
full
to
of only water.
Maybe something else.
Because I knew that there were advances in refrigeration, but I just didn't know what they might be. And I'm glad to know. Of course, you can probably also power one with gas, and that might make Michelle happy. It's interesting to me that lots of people here do work for energy companies, and as somebody who every day gets to edit letters to the editor in for Southern California counties, frequent. I mean, I think we all are singing from the same choir book, but lots of people who write letters, I'm here to tell you, a constant theme is, gee, California only produces X, let's say 1% of the world's greenhouse gases. And so how come we're taking the lead on this? And even if we do it perfectly, it won't make any difference. And I get so frustrated. My job is not to censor their letters, but I get frustrated with that kind of point of view. If nobody takes the first step, then nothing's going to happen in India or China or the Soviet or Russia or wherever. So, but we do understand, I think, as people who work here, that the impact of regulations in California on our businesses is large. And one of the questions phrased in different ways, one of the biggest questions we're getting here is from people saying, look, folks are already going to Nevada and Texas and Arizona, meaning pulling up businesses. And what is it we can do to mitigate the cost for California businesses who feel, rightly or wrongly, that they're taking the brunt of California's green policies? And I don't know who to direct that to, except Danny has got something good to say about it.
Yeah, I'll jump in first, just to say, you know, the listeners or viewers of this know that electric vehicles were the largest segment of the economy by value for California in the last couple of years. So the export of EVs and the technology that goes with them, and obviously Tesla is a huge part of that story, and the valuations on Wall Street we've all heard about, but it's not just Tesla, it's Proterra, BYD being made in Lancaster, Rivian and all the other companies I've mentioned that are in the value and supply chain of electric vehicles. That's already a huge, like more valuable than agriculture, more valuable than wine, more valuable than cannabis, more valuable than Hollywood. Electric vehicles is what California does. We're not paying for these policies, we're benefiting from these policies. California has led for 20, actually 50 years, if you go back to the 70s and energy efficiency mandates and lighting standards and things that California implemented. They've driven innovation and value creation and job creation and wealth creation, and California has captured a lion's share of that in the United States, and that's continuing. And it's actually, you know, there may be an availability heuristic that we have expensive electricity rates, but relatively, because we're efficient in the use of electricity, to produce a widget in California costs about the same as to produce a widget in New York. We run accelerators in New York as well. And California is not disadvantaged by energy cost relative to manufacturing. And it's why Los Angeles as a region is becoming the light manufacturing capital of the country. So I think some of this stuff is like in people's heads, but it's not really true. And on the contrary, these policies have led California to lead the nation and the world, which is to our economic advantage.
Super, Danny. Other people want to weigh in with a thought on that big economic question?
Yeah, I'd love to weigh in, Larry. You know, it's such an important question. You know, I mentioned a few moments ago that we forget how diverse California is, right? We are top industrial hub in the nation. There are industries that use extremely high heat for processing metals and products that either don't want to or simply cannot electrify. And we need clean solutions that'll support their goals so that they do not go out of state, that they can continue to function and run their business here, not only meeting their economic and financial requirements, but still supporting the state in reducing its GHG emissions. So, part of our job as a utility is to support the customer in examining clean fuels and other alternatives to help fully decarbonize the sector. We are working with various customers, industrial customers, to pilot how hydrogen might impact their operations and processes to better understand that. We are also promoting, rapid advancement and innovation pertaining to costs, because that's a huge, huge element of why businesses leave California. And through various partnerships, one example I'll give is one where we are doing a public-private partnership with LADWP, the Green Hydrogen Council, Mitsubishi Power, and others that we call the High Deal. And this is where we are examining a way to achieve large-scale green hydrogen at a cost that is $1.50 per kilogram in the LA Basin by 2030, so that manufacturing companies can have affordable solutions. And our goal is really cost-effective and clean solutions. And prior to my role here in sustainability, I was in the clean transportation space for quite a few years, really examining medium and heavy duty trucks. And I agree with Danny that, electric mobility is the way of the future, and it's something that we can really look to reduce emissions, because in California, over 40% of our greenhouse gas emission is from the transportation sector. But I think we also need to keep into account the operational requirements of these heavy duty trucks that require goods and materials that need to be moved for long distances. And from a technology advancement perspective, I think battery electric options are good in some applications, like the short haul or going from port to warehouses that are local. But for long haul and drayage vehicles, there is a limitation due to weight of the batteries and lengthy charging times that impact the operational requirements of a business. So, I think we need to look at additional solutions like zero emission technologies, like fuel cell electric trucks, that can demonstrate to be a solution of the future. I think most recently, a couple of days ago, Hyundai announced that they would be bringing their heavy duty electric truck, the SCNG, that they introduced in Switzerland a year and a half ago, by the end of this year. That's a big advancement, and that could be a really big opportunity to get over this barrier of adoption. But I think we need to keep into account the operational requirements of these companies and how we can serve to bring down the cost, as well as improve their operational effectiveness.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I don't know if I've ever seen a truck like that, but you certainly notice when you travel in Europe that trucks are smaller and seemingly more efficient, and yet they seem to get goods around a lot more. Speaking of letters to the editor, at least as I was, there's an organized campaign to send editorial page editors such as myself letters about the various ideas for a carbon tax. Many of the people who've submitted written questions are asking about carbon pricing in one way or another. Obviously, we know that's out there in some environmentalists' agenda and some politicians' agendas. Sometimes there's an ebb and flow in that. But drilling down to the particular of, let's say there is a movement realistically toward carbon tax in California, the question is, what role do you see Southern California's energy industries playing in creating a national model for a carbon tax? Does anybody have some expertise in that or a strong opinion on that?
Maybe somewhere in the middle I can offer, Larry. So I'd say, it actually leads over a bit to the last question, right? And I think it's something, a nuanced point in my intro is, when you look at these goals, it's economy-wide, right? And I think you can think of economy-wide in many ways as sort of sectors involved, but also, what costs people bear. And so a carbon tax is sort of another mechanism that allows advancement of clean energy. It's sort of, rather than ratepayers, you can use carbon taxes, but as that carbon tax would promulgate, rates might have a lesser impact because you have another source of sort of income or source of financial stability to put towards clean energy. And so it's really this balancing act of, whether it's, you look at it myopically of, is it just my electricity bill that's maybe increased, or do you kind of consider your share of wallet is a term we kind of use internally, or, sort of your overall spend, and you look at, maybe in some ways an energy bill may have increased, but you have other taxes or other things that have decreased. And so it's sort of that, again, that tool or mechanism to say, is this another or better way to get towards equity, for instance? It would be one really important thing with a carbon tax, but sort of how do you then convert that cash flow that's a carbon tax into action? And I think that would be the big challenge for us, because, frankly, to the earlier question around manufacturing, one of the things with kind of equity and cost of energy is the pace of adoption of technologies and changes of customers is much faster than we're able to do on the regulatory side. And so we have sort of constructs of subsidies or sort of balances of who pays for what that people shift faster than we can. And so a carbon tax could be more flexible. It could be faster way to sort of keep up with technology. And so it's a pretty interesting concept. And I think designed right, it could be a good way to solve all this.
We're coming to the end of our time, but does somebody else have a carbon tax notion?
Very quickly, Larry, sorry, just what was just said, that the design is everything, as Devin said. Designed right is the trick. I mean, we kind of have a carbon tax. The Global Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund in California has been that for certain point sources, but there's been problems around equity, as documented well by Manuel Pastor at UCLA. The fact that frontline and fence line communities have actually suffered more point source pollution, kind of because of some of the impacts. It does generate revenue. That revenue's been shared in some of the investments that the ARB is making, for example, in electric buses for school districts and so on. But we've got to get that design right, and the community and these equity issues have to be front and center in order for it to be maintained in the long haul and supported. It's an elegant idea. It's very much the economist's preferred way, but then we've also got all the proof in the pudding of innovators on the ground, entrepreneurs making stuff happen, and simple targets like the state has written into law consecutively to increase renewable portfolios in the grid. Those things work as well. It's probably going to be both and is the reality. So
Larry, I see a few questions in the Q&A, so I'm just going to throw them in the interest of time. And then if we have any more, we can go back to you that were sent in advance. Danny, this one comes on Lithium Valley. One question is, lithium production is very energy intensive and also has environmental impacts. Wouldn't that require change in California's business regulations? There's a reason why the existing factories are offshore. So, I mean, wouldn't we have to change some of the rules in California to have actual battery production here is the question.
No, I don't think we should. I think we should go through our environmental impact assessment processes as written and ensure that the standard of the factories is the best in the world, and that can be done. And the power to supply it, it is an energy dense product, to bake a cathode from lithium powders and the other ingredients in that cake is a lot of electricity, but that's going to come from the geothermal power. So it's a kind of a sweet confluence. You've already got the power in the Salton Sea geothermal resource to make the batteries if we were to do it in the area. And all that should be handled, but I believe we could do a fully circular economy. And to one of my taste points earlier, the benefit of lithium batteries is that they can be upcycled. In fact, we're already doing that in America. There's a company called Redwood Industries, a spin out of Tesla actually, that takes out car batteries and reuses them, reproduces them into batteries. And there are many companies doing that now. Another one that we have called Rejoule, taking them out and giving them a second life. So there's ways to make a whole industrial value chain and do this right and do it clean, do it better, and involve communities and create jobs in places like Imperial, where jobs are at a premium, as you know.
Great. In fact, so that answers another question someone asked about recycling of lithium batteries. But let's go to that topic of upcycling and recycling in these other kind of energy uses. Anyone want to talk about that a little bit more as we go through the final Q&A here? So what does recycling, for example, Michelle, or upcycling look like in natural gas?
Well, I think for us, I have a different interpretation probably of what others have. Like as an organization, we in our own operation, obviously we produce our own types of waste. So we try to recycle as much as we can in terms of steel materials that may be, byproducts of, pipeline upgrades that we do. So we have a really robust recycling program like that. We are examining policies internally that look at potentially zero waste, because the best thing to do is just not to produce the waste at all. From an upcycling standpoint, this is where I get away from infrastructure and get to kind of the fuels, going back to how I describe renewable natural gas and the waste products that we produce as a human species. And it's a different interpretation of upcycling, but I think it's taking what is there and repurposing and reusing. And from an infrastructure standpoint, it's the same thing where we look at out into 2045, our gas grid is going to look significantly different than it is today. It's not going to look the same, and it will have different purposes. And although I don't go into detail right now, but I think it's another way of looking at repurposing infrastructure and asset that all taxpayers have put billions of dollars into, and leveraging that for a better purpose, right?
Great. Well, one final question, maybe this is to both Devin and whoever else, maybe Danny, is are consumers going to be, and even businesses going to be paying higher prices for electricity in California versus elsewhere if we go down this clean energy path? So that's the kind of bottom line dollars question in terms of cost of electricity, consumers and businesses.
Yeah, I'd say, I mean, Danny touched on it a bit. We're at a good starting point, right? We are actually lower rates than many other areas globally, nationally. And so we sort of have a good place to start from. There is going to be upward pressures, right? Like that's without doubt. There's going to be investments needed. It's going to cause ratepayer rate increases. I think, again, as I kind of touched on earlier, one of the thoughts we have around it is your electricity bill may wind up going up, but electric vehicles are a perfect example of this. You aren't going to the gas pump anymore. And so your sort of energy spend itself is going to be lower. It's just a shift from maybe one form of energy to another. And so it's sort of, again, thinking of this as whole picture, not just what your electricity bill is and not just the rates. It's sort of an offset of, when we get to achieving certain goals, certain taxes might go away because they were designed to support GHG. And so your sort of overall spend is reduced, but your electric bill is, unfortunately probably going to go up, but it's sort of managed through adoption of new technologies and offsets and other costs you have. And what we've seen in our projections is the overall energy spend does go down. It's just your electricity bill does have a slight increase.
Okay, over to you, Larry. Danny, were you going to say something?
I just wanted to say, over time, it has to go down because we don't have a fuel input to the system. We should manage the system so that the costs reduce. When you're not putting any fuel like gas or coal or whatever into the system, you save yourself a huge amount of input cost. And so in countries where you have higher penetration of renewables, like in parts of China, Australia, you actually see wholesale electricity rates going down and retail electricity rates going down. There are system costs in between, that's true, but the system cost is less when you're not putting fuel into it, which is what we're talking about with a renewably powered grid, which is a wonderful thing. And it's also, back to the recycling question, you don't need any input to recycle. You can't recycle gas. It's a once through flow. It gets burnt and aspirated, whereas you're not doing that anymore. And it's the lowest cost electricity on earth coming off your roof, actually.
Larry, over to you for any final thoughts and questions.
Yeah, well, that's sort of I'm going to turn it over to Sam to sort of sign us out and say thanks from the newspaper. But one question that's sort of the opposite of some of the folks worrying about manufacturers leaving. There is one question in the chat that goes to, does California and the United States stand a risk of being left behind in green energy because of our skepticism about global warming, about the short-term costs? Are there other global actors who are so far out ahead of us that we will lose opportunities here? And what can we do to turn that around?
Amen to whoever wrote that. I mean, China is producing 80% of the solar panels on Earth, 70% of the wind turbines on Earth, about 60-some% of the batteries on Earth. And more than 50% of their vehicles per month are electric, and those vehicles are integrated into their grid as though they're batteries. In April, they acquired 21 big batteries, like the 100-megawatt 4-hour duration battery we've installed in California once. So like China is doing this. The European Green Deal, it was called, not the new Green New Deal, but the Green Deal passed in COVID by the European Union, is a $500 billion spend just on the hydrogen economy. That's their plan for recovery out of COVID. And the United States is still debating whether this is happening. While we pioneered it, all these technologies, solar panels, 1954, Bell Labs, New Jersey, lithium-ion batteries, like I said, the United States, 1971. California set on this path 20 years ago, and yet we're being lapped now by other nations.
So let's pick up the pace. That's it from me. That was a great answer, Danny. Thank you. And Karthik, we'll go over to Sam now for thanks and pointing us forward.
Yeah, and just before that, I'll say, the Olympics are coming up. I don't think we'd settle to be third, fourth, fifth, or last on this thing. So yeah, maybe we can get those like global competitive juices going, Danny.
Bronze medal. We should at least get a bronze.
Yep, exactly. So over to you, Sam.
All right, thanks, guys. Listen, this was fantastic. On behalf of the Southern California News Group, I just have to thank our esteemed panelists and wow, for just such an edifying and inspiring conversation, not only around the energy challenges facing us, but man, these innovations and solutions already in gear. A reminder to you that today's session was videotaped, and a link's going to be sent to you so you can share or just revisit some of your favorite moments. It's also posted at scng.com/virtual events, where you can find all of SCNG's past virtual programs, including the SoCal Policy Forum, and you can check out what's coming up next. Speaking of which, watch for what's next at the SoCal Policy Forum, tackling the issue of transportation in the region. I want to thank my colleague, Larry Wilson, as well as Karthik and the team behind him, Paula and Eric. You are the Oz behind the curtain, and I know you're there. Finally, I'd like to encourage everybody to visit any or all of our 11 newspapers for the Southern California News Group to stay informed on today's topic and for the news affecting you locally, of course. And finally, if you'd like to share your thoughts from today or you have additional questions, please email us at events@scng.com. Again, that's scng.com. Thanks, everybody. This was great. See you next time.